So yeah, first of all, Alex, thanks for scheduling this webinar and inviting me to speak. And thank you for all the attendees for across the many time zones. I think we have probably global coverage. Considering some of the attendees that are calling in from EMEA, Asia Pacific, West Coast. Quick introduction, my name's Mike Spade, based here in New York City. Currently lead the private equity efforts for a company called EcoVadis in North America. Prior to that, I served as an adjunct professor at Baruch and FIT here in Manhattan, and started my career, or started my education with a master's in public policy, and led me to Washington, D.C., where I served as a legislative director for a U.S. senator in New Jersey. Went from there to multiple startups where I worked very closely with the VC community and the private equity community. And that's what brings me here. And what I'm going to focus on is the current state of ESG within private equity. And I think to understand the current state, we have to look back, kind of look back where we came from, right? The best way to understand where you are is to get an understanding where you were. And I think in this case, if we look to the far left, this was the 80s, I guess. And, it was clear that ESG wasn't a priority when it was common to have, movies and industries where comments like greed is good was okay, right? I think now if you had greed is good on your website, if you're a financial service institution, you would not be doing very well. So we've kind of crossed the chasm from, okay, greed is good within financial services to quite the opposite, right? Now, what I've done here is pulled from a few private equity websites, and this is not just the BlackRocks and the Bain Capitals and the KKRs and the Advent Internationals. This is across the board on each site for the top 200 global private equity firms. Each site has a ESG report, ESG commitment. In many cases, they highlight their portfolio companies and their commitments to ESG. And there's a reason they're doing this. If we go to the next slide. Okay. So within private equity, one thing that's become clear now is that it's not just for the good of the planet, but it's for the good of the value, whether it's the limited partners on the far left, the general partners in the middle, or the portfolio companies. So, everybody in this area is altruistic, yes, but altruism in this case comes with an ROI. So what we're seeing and what I'm finding is that information on ESG performance is being requested by all of these players. So LPs say to GPs, give us information on your ESG strategy, your ESG frameworks. The general partners collect that from their portfolio companies. The portfolio companies get those questions from their customers. And their customers make investment decisions based on their dollars, what to buy, in addition to where they invest. And it's not far away, a world where an ESG report or an ESG score could be on every website like Amazon saying, oh, I'm thinking about these two pair of shoes. What's the ESG score for the two companies that make those shoes, and making a decision based on that. So what we're seeing is the closed loop of the agreement that ESG is good for everyone, and the conversations we're having are not around, hey, does this make financial sense? Those conversations are in the past. There's the understanding that it is make financial sense, and the overarching belief, and the reason I work at EcoVadis, and the reason that GPs, LPs, and portfolio companies are also focusing on it is you want to make the world a better place. So if we go to the next slide. Yeah. So this is the life cycle of a private equity firm bringing in a portfolio company, bringing it in, working closely with it, and then an exit. So if we go look at the left, it's the due diligence process. So private equity firm determines this is a company we would like to invest in. They begin the review of that company, and within that due diligence process is a ESG analysis. So they understand that a company that performs well on ESG, it means a few things. It means that they've got structure and framework in place to not only create the documentation, but to make sure it's followed through on. And what I'm hearing too is during this due diligence phase is that the portfolio companies show not just ESG success, but their success in creating frameworks throughout the organization. So the private equity firm says, okay, this is a good company. They scored well on ESG and they scored well in other areas. Let's make an investment, right? So, they put down, dollars based on many factors, of which ESG is one. And it's understood at that point, as they're brought into the portfolio, that there will be constant benchmarking and reporting. So, let's say 3 months into the portfolio company will be asked to do another ESG analysis. The real goal of this ESG analysis is to show areas of improvement. So, do we need to focus on greenhouse gases? Do we need to focus on labor rights? Is there issues in certain countries in which we operate? And are the suppliers even in those countries to these portfolio companies operating in good faith? So this is an iterative process throughout the 5 to 10 years average that a portfolio company is within the portfolio of the GP. And as this is happening and as the improvements are taking place, the portfolio company is reporting to the GP, and the GP is reporting to the LP. They're working towards an exit, whether it's a M&A or going from a private company to a public company. And also, go to the next slide. This time and effort on ESG is being caused by a few different kind of groundswells and movement within the market. So Alex, if we go to the next slide. So the first momentum that we're seeing out there, and this is what we're seeing as the flood, right? If we look here to the far left, it's the year 1995, and as we saw with Gordon Gekko from Wall Street, greed is good. Not a lot of sustainability focused concern, not a lot of ESG investing. And as we move to the right, it goes straight up and to the right. So dollars are flooding the market into ESG investments. And if we go to the next slide, there's a groundswell coming, that's causing this flood. Alex, if we go to the next slide, what we're seeing out there is that one of the areas of groundswell is the younger generation putting their dollars, where they believe companies are working to make a better world. So, and it's clearly not where we came from. So if you see on the left, the millennials, they're focused and maybe they're investing on their phones right now. Well, if we look to the right, that's who anybody's ever seen the movie Wall Street. That's Bud Fox on that big phone, and he is not making investments in ESG right now. So I think what was the company? Blue Endicott Steel is the company he was investing in, and it was all for all the wrong reasons. So finally, if we go to the last slide, there's a challenge here. And the challenge is that there are many rules, many regulations, many frameworks, and private equity firms and financial service firms are looking to determine, what is the best way forward? What is the best way to report on ESG? What is the best way to assess companies for ESG investments? So, what we're saying is regulations, the effect of these regulations, and what's the standard. And we'll be covering that later in the presentation, but just wanted to do a quick overview of what we're seeing out there within ESG, within private equity. So thanks, Alex. Well, first of all, the WEAF presentation I found fascinating, and working and meeting with financial services on a daily basis, I see the need for what you just presented almost everywhere. So I really enjoyed that.
Thank you very much.
Oh, no, thank you. Quickly on EcoVadis, the first thing is, we focus on the private enterprises, and what we've done over 13 years is assess private companies. And how we do this assessment is within large enterprises' supply chains. So we work with Johnson & Johnson, Nestle, Coca-Cola, and what they say is to us, we have 40, like J&J has 40,000 suppliers, and what they need is insight into these suppliers' ESG performance. So what they'll say is, we need somebody to go to these 40,000 suppliers, gather documentation from them, interview them, and then come up with a assessment methodology based on the existing frameworks that are out there and based on best practices and regulation. And then J&J can then look at that, throughout their 40,000 supplier list. And we're able to do this, and we started 13 years ago because we have around 300 sustainability experts across the globe. So they work in 60 different countries. They speak languages that are in country, and that enables them to work over a 4 to 8 week basis with these individual companies to do a in-depth review on certain key metrics. If we go to the next slide, and this is currently, this network is over 80,000 companies have been rated, private companies, and 60 plus companies are responsible for monitoring their suppliers through the 80,000. And if we go to the next slide, the benefit here to private equity, and specifically the general practitioners, the GPs, is that a large part of their portfolio is already assessed. So for example, when we talk to a KKR or BlackRock, they have 100 portfolio companies as an example. There's probably usually 30 to 40 that have already been assessed by EcoVadis. So out of that 80,000 list, so that gives them a kind of a starting point. And within the assessment is not just, we've reviewed your best practices, your documentation, we've talked to the board and the executives. It's also, here's areas where there needs to be improvement, and here's some ideas or ways that other companies, similar industry, similar size, similar country, have made changes and improved over time. And that's what the private equity customers enjoy, is that it's not just, hey, here's somebody got a 55 out of 100. It's, okay, somebody got a 55, and this is how they can work with you to potentially make it better. And, we're agnostic third party. We don't help them along the process. But, we will say this was a low area based on benchmarking across the 80,000. And we'll say within your portfolio, it's also a little low. And because of that, it could be a good area to focus. If we go to the next slide, this describes the issues that are currently going on out there. Is that from company to company, besides the issues that Alex talked about and that we've talked about, there's the company to company information transfer is gotten quite difficult, because with enterprises working with enterprises, they all have different questions and oh, what's your CO2 footprint? What's your, CSR, conflict materials, blah, 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 blah. So they're constantly getting bombarded with these questionnaires. So one of the benefits of EcoVadis is they're able to just, every time they get a questionnaire, they are able to respond with, here's my EcoVadis assessment. The information that you're asking for is in here, because what we do is we build out our assessments based on all of these different frameworks, all of these different regulations in country, and it solves a big problem for them because they're able to just push that button the same way that portfolio companies do for the within private equity. And if we go to the next slide, as I mentioned before, one of the benefits of EcoVadis is that we have the experts in country speaking that language, so we can understand a supplier in China as well as we can understand a supplier in Brazil, and not only understand the language, but understand the rules and regulations in the way of working in those countries. And if we go to the next slide, I think we can skip this one because we talked about it during the first part. Okay, here's an example of the interface and what the portfolio companies, in the case what I'm focused on, can see for what the GPs can see for each individual portfolio company. And once again, the benefit is during most of our meetings, we can say, okay, we've already assessed 30 of your, usually about 30% of your existing portfolio companies. Here, we'll turn it on. Here you can see what's available for one of your portfolio companies. And as you can see here, they're at 46%. This is how they benchmark against other enterprises in that sector. Here's their individual scores based on 21 criteria and sub-criteria. Here's areas for improvement. And then if we go to the next slide, we can say, okay, well, here's also dashboard performance of your portfolio companies all at once. So they can drill down into the individual portfolio company, or they can look at all their portfolio companies together. And then, if we go to the next slide, they can also look at all the portfolio companies as far as, okay, this is where they need to make improvements. And you work with them, and then we'll come back and assess in 3 to 6 months. We'll go through the same 4 to 8 week process. We know now where to focus on. We'll work with you on getting the documentation together, reviewing the documentation, reviewing the way you use it, and then making a determination on if there should be an update in the score. Which in the portfolio world, company world, there's quite a lot of pressure from the GPs and the LPs to improve their scores. And, in those cases, we're quite frequently deliverer of bad news. If you go to the next slide. And, there's many metrics in the reporting: diversity, inclusion, greenhouse gas, carbon footprint, human rights, environmental issues, human trafficking, bribery. One of the most interesting ones we're currently working on is any interaction with endangered species. So they need to collect information on where they're, if it's minerals and, in manufacturing, what country, what part of the country, are there endangered species in that part? They got to report back on that. So it's quite in depth. And, that's the last slide. So as we move to the Q&A, I'm available to answer any questions.